So this is really an introductory course, and that could not be more true than this very brief introduction to SQL that I'll be giving you here in this segment of the lecture. SQL, sometimes pronounced SQL, is a structured query language that is a very commonly used way of accessing data in relational database. It's a high-level language. The program is able to avoid specifying a lot of the implementation details that would actually return the data that's necessary for more lower-level languages like C++. And SQL queries are often optimized autonomously by the DBMS. They're automatically going to be optimized to be as efficient as they can be. There's a couple of different standards. There are many variations of those standards, both in industry and in other standards. But the high-level details of SQL are very similar across all of the implementations, very, very similar. Maybe the most common SQL statement that you will see is the select from where statements. Essentially, this is an attempt to get data out of the database. So you are selecting some desired attributes from one or more of the tables where some conditions about the data are true, right? You're trying to get all of the students who got an A in 310 or all of the students who got an A in 636. This is selecting all of the students from the grades table where the condition is they got an A or something in that class. Now this syntax can include Boolean operators like and, or not, and you can use parentheses for precedence in the where clause. And it isn't a case-insensitive language, so upper and lower case characters are treated the same. The one sort of idiomatic difference there is typically you would use all caps for the keywords like select from and where, which is one of the reasons why I have them in all caps on these slides. If you do happen to have more than one table in a relationship, then, if you have one table in the relation in the from clause and a star in the select clause, that's going to basically stand in for all of the attributes that are available in this table. And that's certainly true for joins and other more complicated queries as well. Now, this isn't really intended to be an introduction to SQL as a syntax or SQL programming. So I'm only really trying to introduce some of the very, very basics. And if you're interested in learning more, there are some resources available in the slides, including a couple that I think are really well targeted for beginners. I think these last two are very, very good for beginners. And it's not the kind of thing that I would recommend doing unless you're very interested in doing programming down the road, right? Database design or programming down the road. 620 is a much better introduction to databases. You may actually want to hold off on making career decisions until you've actually played with some of this stuff and done some of the exercises in 620, because that's really more of a course intended to introduce you to what do database administrators and database designers end up doing in the real world. This class is really just introducing you to the basics so that you'll be able to do entity relationship diagrams and high-level design with databases. There are two more concepts that you should understand about databases that are not particularly well covered in the book, which is why I'm recommending that you read the Wikipedia articles on these. The first is the primary key. This is actually the unique identifier for all of the rows in a table. You typically have to specify it, so this is a SQL statement that creates a table in a database. It's part of a schema for creating a table. You would create a table. This is the actual name that you would use for the table. This is the name you would use for the column identifier. And in this particular case, we're specifying that it is a primary key by actually including this phrase here, that it is a primary key. Similarly, a foreign key is a unique identifier for a row in some other table, right? So if you are creating a foreign key, you specify a different syntax than what you would typically do for a primary key. You can see the same syntax here for creating the table. This is the primary key identifier. In order to create a foreign key, you would actually use an entirely separate clause that shows which other table is being referenced and which key column in that table is actually serving as the foreign key. Okay. You also have to provide some syntax to say what happens if you delete the row in the current table. So for example, if we've created a new entry into this table, and we've provided the ID, the column 2, column 3, and so on, what happens when we delete that entry? Do we also have to delete the entry in the foreign table, or do we leave it alone? And that's the syntax that you would use for specifying this. Again, the Wikipedia articles for both primary key and foreign key are both very good, and I would recommend that you read them, because this is actually the key pardon the pun, the key way that relational databases operate is by using these identifiers in ways that are very important for understanding how this data is actually going to relate in structure.